Okay, so I am here at last with Luca Lampariello, whom I'm sure needs no introduction, but just in case for some reason there's someone who's discovered my channel who has not discovered you, um, Luca, do you want to give us a quick introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I do need an introduction, I think. I'm Luca Lampariello. I'm Italian. I'm a language coach. I love languages. I have a YouTube channel that talks and revolves around second language acquisition, or more simply language learning. And I've been learning a lot of languages in the last 30 years. And on my YouTube channel and on my blog, I share my passion for language learning. I think that's it in a nutshell, more or less.
Perfect, great. So this might be a little bit of a strong one to start with, but whatever, we're going with it. You've been learning languages for 30 years. In your opinion, what is the worst language learning advice that you commonly hear? So not just something that you heard once, but something that you hear often.
That's a good one. I didn't expect that. I think that this is my personal view, but one of the worst pieces of advice is to start with apps, meaning that I have come to think that anything could be useful, because whatever, if you spend 2-3 minutes on language learning, it's better than nothing. But I honestly, I think that specific piece of advice of just start learning with an app is not the best in my case. I'm very old-fashioned in this regard. I really like paper, but I believe that there are better language learning materials that can offer a better, starting point when it comes to learning a language from scratch. That's one. There are possibly others. For example, it really depends on the learner, but one thing that I would do or would avoid doing better would be to avoid speaking from the very beginning if the language you're learning is kind of distant, meaning it's kind of difficult. Let me give you an example. For a native English speaker, let's say Swedish is a close language, while Japanese is a very distant language in terms of language structure, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that, starting to speak from the very beginning might be counterproductive in that specific case. There are others in general, but I think these two, I think they can do some damage if a person is not really an expert in language learning and doesn't know how to start. Let's put it this way.
I'll just add to that I've now come to think I spoke early with Swedish and it sort of worked. It worked for a little while, but now with Swedish being easily my best second language, I would not do that again, even with Swedish or with anything, no matter how close to English it was, unless it was just another accent in English. Then I wouldn't speak early. So this is kind of a complex one to set up. Well, not complex, but so when I spoke to Steve, he and I kind of agreed that the late great Moses McCormack would be at like one end of the scale where he learns like 50 languages to a really kind of basic level, and that Matt, as in Matt versus Japan, would be at the other end of the scale where he learns one language to a very high level, and in his case, Japanese, as you just said, very distant from English. You're sort of known for being, I feel like, kind of a combination of both, in that you speak quite a few languages, but not just to a very basic level, to a more fluent level. Where would you put yourself on that scale? Like you haven't gone as far as Matt, but you also you don't just learn things for a few days and then.
Well, I'm not sure about putting myself on a scale. I don't think that matters that much. What really matters to me is whether I can actually use the languages in my life to make my life richer. So I don't think in terms of numbers. I think in terms of utility. Like, how is this language going to impact my life? So I don't learn languages to get to a specific number. I start learning languages. I do learn languages to get a better life. And every time that I reach a level which allows me to actually start enjoying the language, start using the language to communicate with people or enjoy literature or watch movies or whatnot, I just make sure that, I start learning a new one. So in my case, it kind of happened. I'm not thinking in terms of numbers. I'm thinking more in terms of systems, where every time that, I know that in my life, I'm going to learn a lot of languages because I'm just a curious person. So that's going to happen. Probably I'm going to be learning languages until the end of my life. But I do care about speaking languages well. So for me, it's not a matter of speaking a bunch of languages just for the sake of it, or to give myself the label polyglot. To me, it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. For me, I have a very pragmatic, practical approach to language learning, where what counts is whether you can actually speak the language and use it in your real life to get a better life. Speaking one language extremely well is fine. To each his own. Everybody is different. In my case, I've just realized that you can actually learn a lot of languages well. I think I watched a video of yours where you were saying that if you try to learn a lot of languages, then you kind of spread yourself thin, which is actually true, because you're kind of, learning any language requires a lot of effort, a lot of energy. But in my case, I've made it I've created a strategy where before I move on to another language, I make sure that I maintain the other languages, or I get to a point where I can maintain them and I integrate them into my life. Of course, there are limits to that. Maybe we can talk about this later, but it's really difficult to maintain 14 languages. On an average, maybe I can use, let's say, 6 or 10. But I never use more than 10 languages in one day. Normally it's about 5 or 6 at least every day, or on a weekly cycle. So to answer your question, I don't think in terms of scales. I think I don't it's not about whether you speak a language really well or a lot of languages at a basic level. I want to speak as many languages as I can, well enough so that I can enjoy them, and I can enjoy life, and especially here in Europe, if you speak a bunch of languages, then everything is fantastic. I go to Hungary, I can speak Hungarian with a taxi driver. I go to Polish, and my life has improved in so many ways that I cannot even start talking about it. It's just mind-blowing. So that's why I say, okay, well, the next one I want to learn is Serbian. Why do I want to learn Serbian? Serbian is a country I was in. I know that I'm going to go to Serbia again. It's just around the corner. And this is the way I approach languages. I literally learn languages to have a better life. I don't really care about numbers or labels.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, to maybe take the most unfair example out of that, as the question I have here is, how do you choose your languages? But you've sort of just answered that, and so I would say, for example, Danish. You already speak Swedish, and it's maybe been a while since you've brushed up on your Swedish, but at least that's the impression you've given me.
Yep.
You could, I kind of wonder about the benefit of speaking Danish then, because of course you could just speak English, and there's a little bit of a myth there about the Scandinavian countries that everyone speaks English to an absolutely perfect level. That is not true. They do speak it very well. You could totally get away in Denmark with just English or even Swedish, but you've chosen to learn Danish, and I feel like that's going to mess a little bit with your Swedish. And so what was the thought there?
You asked very interesting and good questions, Lamont. So not everything I do I do things considering the practicality of them, meaning how can I actually use this language to, when I travel or with people or friends. The case of Danish is really specific. And I would say that to me, I say this in general, to me, learning anything, and particularly learning languages, is an act of love. And by love, I don't mean just romantic love. It's an act of, by love, I mean an act of, it's respect towards a given country. Scandinavia fascinates me in so many ways I cannot even fathom, for a number of reasons. Now, we don't have time to explore all of them, but there's a story behind Danish. I fell in love with a Danish girl, you know, back in the day, and I got to know a little bit about Denmark, and I have a lot of respect for that country for a lot of reasons. So I thought, okay, well, actually, it's not that useful to learn that language, because everybody speaks English, and maybe it's going to even backfire if I learn Swedish. And it actually, there is some sort of conflict, obviously, between the two. But to me, it's like literally in the case of Danish, it's an act of love. I didn't do it just because it was useful. It was not. It's true. Truth be told, it's not that useful. I did it because out of respect for the country and as an act of love. And you sometimes you do things because they're the result of experiences and things that happen in your life. And I've never regretted learning Danish. Maybe sometimes I ask myself, is this like really useful? And the answer is not that much. But again, I'm reminded of the reasons why I wanted to learn Danish, and that's what counts for me.
So I'm going to get into some questions that were asked on Instagram or YouTube or one of the... So Nathan asks, can you both share one of your most memorable stories about learning/using Swedish?
Well, in my case, I would say a couple of things. I think I said that in the interview we made for my channel. And I remember when I started understanding movies, and I was really excited. So that was a eureka moment for me, because, you know, when you start understanding movies, that's really exciting. And the second thing, maybe it's not one specific episode, but I think that Swedish has really helped me getting to know a lot of Norwegians. For example, when I was back in the day, some 10 years ago, I got to know a lot of Norwegians, because there were like these groups of Norwegian students coming to Rome to study for like 2 or 3 months. And then we happened to be around the square. There's a big fountain where people can just sit and hang out. And I remember I was hearing Norwegian, and I just turned and I started speaking Swedish. That was kind of a key to the Scandinavian world. People started asking, why do you speak Swedish? Even if it were Norwegians, and they understood pretty much everything I said. Now, I know this might be a stereotype or might be a legend, but I actually saw that let's say Norwegians understand Swedes a little bit better than Swedes understand Norwegians, although the languages are practically the same. If you see them written, even Danish, you know, you can tell, well, this was just the same language. And I would say that I've spoken a lot in Swedish. Sometimes I can't even tell. I remember I couldn't tell whether the person was speaking Norwegian or Swedish. I could understand them. So that was maybe that's not one specific episode, but it's the interesting part of learning Swedish, is that you get access to the entire Scandinavian world, I would say. So it's fascinating, because I understand Norwegian. I can see it written. I can understand it. If I watch it with English or, you know, even Norwegian subtitles, I can understand. There's an interesting movie. I think it's kind of similar to The Bridge in the sense that they speak both Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish. It's about, I'm pretty sure you know of it. It's like I don't remember the title for whatever reason, but it's about a catastrophe, and then there's some moral dilemmas of a father who's, you know,
French. It's got a French name. It's called
Force Majeure.
Force Majeure.
Force Majeure. That's exactly the one. So you can, you know, it's really interesting when they speak a mix of the 2 or 3 languages at the same time. That's you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I can confirm that it's a little bit of a myth that Swedes and Danes will just speak those languages to each other. They will, but they'll also throw in a lot of English and they'll confirm things. But Swedes and Norwegians can understand each other very well. I have a story. I'd only been learning Swedish for about 2 years, so actually it wasn't that good, because I didn't really know what I was doing for the first 2 years. But I was at a party, a Swedish party in Sydney, and I was speaking to this girl for maybe 8-9 minutes or something, and I was having a huge amount of difficulty understanding her. And I was saying things, but then I was just guessing at what she was saying back. And after a while, I said, "Sorry, I'm really having a hard time understanding you. Where are you from?" And she said, "Oh, Norway." I didn't even know, but she had, because she was from Norway, and this sounds like I'm flexing, but it's really not. She assumed I was Swedish because everyone at the party was Swedish except her. And no, although my Swedish wasn't that good, Norwegians can't hear enough to know. They can understand, but they can't hear, "Oh, something's wrong with your Swedish," because their ear is not tuned to whether it's correct or not. So I actually really like speaking to Norwegians because they can't tell when you're wrong, basically.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. I had a lot of conversations with Norwegians, always speaking Swedish, then getting back. But one thing I would add, I would not learn Norwegian now because I would confuse the two, especially because I'm learning Danish. And I already confuse Danish with Swedish sometimes. For example, my teacher, with whom I have to talk a little bit later today, she always goes like, "No," she goes like, "This is not Danish, this is Swedish," because it gets in the way, because Swedish is obviously more dominant than Danish. But yeah.
As in, you're trying to speak Danish to her.
We just speak Danish. All the time, but inevitably I sometimes, well, more often than not, I resort to things. Sometimes I invent things and they're correct, but they're just, with the Swedish, she was just smiling at me at the very beginning when we started doing this at the beginning of the year, saying, "This is actually, you sound cute because you speak Danish with a Swedish accent." So I said, "Well, it's okay."
I wouldn't even bother. Like, I'm probably never going to learn Danish or Norwegian. I'm just going to speak Swedish forever. I might learn to understand Danish or Norwegian. I don't need to, but I might learn to understand Danish one day. But I don't want to learn to speak it because it just messes with me.
Danish is, sorry to cut you off. Danish is a very fascinating language in the sense that of the Scandinavian group, its pronunciation system is really strange in the sense that, like English, it has a very peculiar spelling system. So you don't actually read as you speak. In Swedish, you more or less read as you speak. Like, you see the written language and you know how to pronounce words. In Danish, that's not the case. And also they have very peculiar the language has very peculiar intonation patterns. They have this, the D. I don't know if you've heard of the infamous D. That's the reason why they sound very guttural, or it's like, which is very difficult to pronounce. But it's fascinating. It's just speaking Swedish, but I know this might sound offensive to Danish ears. Like, they say, Swedes say, "Du pratar svenska som du har en potatis i munnen." This is very common. Like, you speaking Danish is like speaking Swedish, like you have a potato in your mouth because you don't open your mouth that much.
Yeah. They're all good friends. They have a good laugh with each other. It's like Australians and Kiwis. We pretend that we're not friends, but we love each other.
Of course.
So Moises asks, how can we improve our own mother language if we have been surrounded by a B2+ environment? How could we get to mastery in all aspects?
Fascinating question. There's so much to say here. The first thing I would say is that, in my personal view, if you have a very good grasp of your own native language, which seems obvious and ridiculous, but it's not, it will hugely help learn a second language. Let me give you an example. The more knowledgeable, the more educated you are in general, and the better you speak your native language, and you have, let's say, metacognitive, you understand how your language is structured, that really helps in terms of especially deliberate instructions. For example, I don't know how it is in Australia, but I was very surprised to know that in America, I'm not American, but I've had a lot of contact with American students, they don't know a lot of what we call analisi logica in Italian. So when we are in middle school, we spend hours trying to learn to dissect the language from a syntactical point of view, and we know words, how to give the right words and terms, grammatical terms to things, so we understand that that is an adverb. That's the function, you know. And when you learn explicitly, when you grab a language learning material such as Assimil, then they have these short, albeit concise and thorough language grammar explanations where they use a lot of these terms. And I was surprised to know that a lot of people, they have no clue about, oh, what is that? You know, I don't know if in Australia you learn the stuff we learn in Italy in terms of, you know.
I did, but I don't think it's very common in Australia. I don't, people are very against that kind of thing in general, so even if schools try to teach it, a lot of people think it's this very textbook formal approach to language that they don't like. And but as Australia is one of the most, except for immigrants, Australia is one of the most monolingual countries in the world in terms of, so we can't, whatever we do here should not be done elsewhere, probably.
As much as I think that it's true that it's done in a kind of bookish way, it's kind of, you know, the traditional way, I think it can be very beneficial if it's done in a certain way, because it helps your brain understand better how to dissect the language from an explicit point of view, which can help. Ultimately, you have to learn a language. In my book, you have to learn a language implicitly by exposure. But I think that 20% you can throw in there where you can actually understand, okay, this grammar term or this function can help in learning a second language. And in general, going back to your question, I believe that the better you speak your native language, the better you can learn a second one. Now, going back even further, how can you improve your own native language? Again, deliberate practice, meaning that if you engage in conversations, everyday life conversations, you're not going to improve that much. I was thinking about this with my friends. English has literally taken over in my life. So I think I spend 4 or 5 hours speaking English every day, whether I want it or not, exposing myself to the language. And I thought that, Italian is a little bit in the back burner, which might sound a little bit weird, but because I do live in Italy, and I've realized that even if I meet with friends and we talk for hours, that's still simple practice, meaning we use simple language, we use slang. You really do not engage in activities where you have to make a presentation or you have to use refined language to, give a speech or to write a dissertation. So my answer to that, if you want to improve your language, you need to do a couple of things. You need to, I would say, start, for example, analyzing speeches of eloquent people. A couple of examples. I don't know if you know Jordan Peterson. You might like him or not, but he is a very eloquent speaker. If you were trying to improve your English, it would be great to analyze. I do this for a higher level. I analyze actually the speech patterns of very eloquent people. Obama is another example. Not only that, but you can also, for example, learn how they use their co-speech gestures, how they use their hands in order to express what they're saying better. One thing, for example, you're analyzing people and scribbling down things like, turns of phrases they use or certain way of expressing themselves. You can, and then you can do output and get feedback. That's called deliberate practice. That's what really works. In terms of speaking, I don't know if you ever heard of Toastmasters. Toastmasters is this place where you can just subscribe and then you can have, you can speak and you receive feedback directly from people saying, okay, it generally helps you speak in public better, but in terms of improving your language and communicating better, it can be a valuable exercise you can do online or offline directly in some place, like directly with people, live people. Now you can do it now that the coronavirus crisis is, I don't know about Australia, but here it's okay.
We're getting better slowly.
Getting better. And then you can do writing and getting feedback. Again, writing really helps. It's difficult to do, it takes a lot of energy, but I believe it's one of the things that helped me the most in terms of refining my grammar in English. It was not so much about grammar drills. They did help a little bit, but the real deal was to improve my writing and also my speaking, because I believe that all these skills are interconnected. Speaking is connected with writing is connected with listening, etc., etc. I spent countless hours at home Learning how to write. I remember, I don't have it now. If I had it now, I would show you. The first time that I wrote, I was a short dissertation about, I don't remember exactly what. It was all red corrections. My American tutor, she corrected everything, and she said, this is really difficult. If there's one difficult thing for us Italians when it comes to learning English, it's writing well, because the overall Anglo-Saxon mentality of writing is really difficult, really different from the Latin, the Romance language world. We tend to be very verbose, you know. We tend to write very lengthy sentences. The Anglo-Saxon world is more like concise, and it's a completely different logic in terms of expressing yourself in writing. So just to go back to your question, is like analyze speeches and learning how, not to imitate, but learning from eloquent speakers, then getting a lot of speaking practice in terms of giving speeches, for example, or presenting something, and getting feedback, which is really important, and actually trying to use that feedback, because if you get feedback and you forget about it, it's not very useful. And the third thing is, same concept, engage in meaningful and interesting, intensive writing, get feedback, and reuse that feedback in order to improve your writing. I'm not going to share all the details because it's going to take us hours, but this is what I've basically done when it comes to learning English at a decent level, so to speak.
Being humble.
It took me years and years, 30 years to get where I am right now. So it's when people say, for example, "Oh, you speak English well." I've been at it for 30 years, constantly trying to improve every single day. So,
Yeah, and you can see, actually, I think you mentioned this to me. You can see the improvement from in your English from your earliest videos, which I think were 10 or 11 years ago or something.
Speaking of which, I wanted to, but this is something that I've been thinking about, could be interesting, is I'm just, previewing this here. It would be interesting to have a video where I analyze myself, just like, oh, now I understand. For example, I was listening to one of the first videos I made. I said, oh my goodness. I was just like, oh my goodness. You can tell, for example, you can tell that the entire system, like the way I was speaking, how I was using my mouth, like, because at the end of the day, the mouth is a resonator, intonation mistakes, pronunciation mistakes. It's fascinating to see, oh, that's how I sounded, like, I don't know, some 10 years ago. And I've been trying to, we're opening a can of worms here, sounding or not sounding like a native. I understand that perfection does not exist, and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. The most important thing is to actually get your point across in an eloquent way. But I try to do my best whenever someone corrects me. It always, the better you speak a language, the easier it is to integrate corrections and feedback, because your mind is more flexible. So whenever someone points out, for example, that I said, I don't remember, I don't know if it sounds the same in Australian English, but to be articulate and to articulate, or something along those lines, these are slightly different things. You pronounce it in a slightly different thing. So when someone pointed that out to me, I went like, oh my God, it was just mind blowing to me when someone corrects, and there's quite a few things here and there that I say they're not correct. Something like, I don't know how you say it in Australian English, Roosevelt, I think it's Roosevelt, it's not Roosevelt, and a lot of these small things here and there that I always try to improve on the go.
Yeah, wow. Okay. And I would say also for people interested that obviously all the stuff that Luca just said doesn't only apply to your native language, it applies to a language that you have at a high level. So if I were to take that advice, it's a long process, but if I were to take a lot of that advice from my Swedish, then obviously my Swedish would improve greatly. But not a good idea. It's something that I started yesterday. Or
one last thing I wanted to say is that you don't have to be a language perfectionist, but I do believe that if you develop a flexible mind, you can actually improve so much. And even in the field of phonetics, I call it phonetics or sound structure, I believe that while I might have a knack for languages, we always get into this debate of nurture versus nature, whether you have talent or not. I might have a knack for accents or for, getting the sounds right, but for me, that's the result of a lot of interest more than anything. It's a lot of work. You just see the tip of the iceberg and you think, oh, this guy just speaks these languages well because he's gifted, but he just picks up the sounds, or he's got the perfect ear. I don't remember the perfect pitch. It's not necessarily true. It's more about it. I think a lot of it might be, again, some predisposition, whatever, knack, whatever you want to call it, but it's a lot of flexibility, interest, and hard work over a long period of time.
Yes, very good.
Glad you like it.
So sorry, that sounded very yes, it sounded a bit condescending.
No.
I was just thinking about how is it, there was this question in Spanish, which Luca has translated for me. Is it okay? This is sort of a question within a question here, but is it possible to speak a language well without talking to native speakers?
Well, it depends on what you mean by well. I believe that when it comes to when it comes to speaking a language well, if in my own definition of speaking a language well, it means to communicate in a language well. And in order to communicate, you have to communicate with, the verb communicate requires the particle with someone. You can't communicate with yourself. You can't talk to yourself, which is a very valuable exercise if you do it well. But at the end of the day, I believe that language learning, speaking a foreign language, is like building a story in your mind. I recently watched an incredibly beautiful video about the movie Arrival, seen from the point of view of time and language acquisition. That was the interesting part. And the thing that struck me the most is that language learning, when you learn a foreign language, or when you learn anything, like to communicate in it with a different tool, is about building a story in your mind. If you think about it, when you speak a foreign language, be it English, Swedish, whatever, I'm thinking in my own case, it's been the way I speak now is the result of countless experiences that I've had, people I've come into contact with. It's not just about grammar drills. It's not just about books I read. It's about people. It's about the experiences that you have. And sometimes, for example, even in our own native language, we sometimes find ourselves thinking or saying things that our parents said because you heard it around and it got imprinted in your mind. So while I do believe that you can engage in self-talk practice and you can talk to yourself and it's great, but I do believe that you have to have the human factor in the equation, so to speak, and you have to talk to people, you have to have experiences. So my simple piece of advice is, yes, you can learn to speak a language, but if you don't engage with native speakers, and most of all, if you don't spend time with the language and with real situations, you're really not going to grasp the soul of the language. Now, someone might say, well, I live in, say, Kentucky, or I live in Arkansas, and I don't have the chance, or Australia for that matter, and I don't have the chance of flying to Sweden and speak to Swedish people. Well, you can talk to people on Skype, and that's great. That's what the internet allows us to talk with pretty much everyone around the globe. The problem is, though, that in my own case, and I'm talking about my own experience, if you want to reach a level of language maturity, being like you understand how a language is not just only spoken but used in real life and in real situations, I think that you need contact with native speakers. And even better, if you don't have to go and live in country, but if you have the possibility of flying to and traveling to a country and maybe experiencing their way of life, the way of life of the people who speak your target language, it's even better. That's how you reach a very high level of not only of language ability, but also of language awareness, which is another level.
Yeah, and I would add to that, or to give an example of what you're talking about. It's almost like all the practice that you might do might make you good at the language, but it's the conversations that you'll remember. So I was I was working, and sometimes I have to call a roll for adults. Like I have to basically find out who's going to be in a photo, and I called this roll, and I saw this name, Marianne Fredriksson, with a double S in the Fredriksson and a K, which is a super unusual way to spell it in Australia. And when I saw it, my brain just switched into Swedish. It wasn't very long ago, so I was doing a lot of Swedish at the time. And I saw it, and I read it out like that. I was reading all these normal, like all these well, there's no real normal Australian name, but just names that I'm just like Chloe and David, and then I just see this, and I say Marianne Fredriksson. And I saw it, as soon as I said it, I thought, oh, what an idiot. Everyone's going to just be like, what? Because this is in front of like 20 people. And she said, yeah, I'm here. And I took the name off and wrote down her position in the photo, because that's why. And then afterwards, Marianne came up to me and said, "Är du svensk?" And I was like, no, I'm not actually. I was answered in Swedish, but I said, I'm actually not Swedish. And she said, well, why do you speak Swedish? I heard, and I was like, how did you know I speak Swedish? And she said, you read my name out in Swedish. That's what she said. And she said, you read it as if a Swede would read it, as the way a Swede would read it. And I suddenly got all super nervous, because I was like, it's happened. I'm actually speaking to a real Swede who heard me speaking Swedish, quote unquote. And now they're actually talking to me. So I got all nervous, and my Swedish suddenly sucked. But despite that, I've definitely spoken better Swedish in conversations lots of times on Skype and stuff. But despite that memory, that is not going away. That was I was so happy for the whole day after that.
It's a fascinating story, and I would add to it that when people say, for example, oh, I'm about to go to the country, either they're going to move to the country or they're going to live in country, and then they've never spoken the language in real life, I always tell them, look, whatever happens, you have to face the unknown, because you're going to get this, the experience of, I don't know, buying a ticket, going to a restaurant in that language. And at the beginning, we get really nervous because the first time we speak with someone live or in real life, I think it's bound to happen. It's bound to, I think that we remember best the experiences that involve strong emotions, be like whether, you will remember that for the rest of your life because you remember the emotions involved. So just to go back to the question before, is that learning to speak a language at not only just speaking the language, but being able to understand how the language is actually used for meaningful communication is a long process that involves a lot of experiences, and inevitably there will be some sort of discomfort, I would say, because every kind of form of growth entails a certain degree amount of discomfort that you have to go through inevitably in order to get where you want to get.
Well, sorry, I just completely forgot that I was still on video then. But thank you, Luca, for coming on. It's been a long time coming, this chat, but thank you. We got it to happen finally, and thank you for imparting your wisdom to us.
Thank you so much, Lamont. I wish you a fantastic evening, night in beautiful Australia, and I will talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Luca.